Do you have a true scary story you want to send my way? Go to astheravendreams.com and click on the button to submit your story. And of course, thank you. This is a true story. I know many people say that, but this is from my own personal experience, and everything I'm about to say is true. My mom, grandma, and I moved into this house when I was in 4th grade. It's not a nice house in a nice area. The outside brick is green in places, the base of the house is crumbling away and rotten. Inside there was mold, and the roof leaked in places. The thing that I didn't like the most, it was how I felt when I was standing outside. Like I was being watched. And what happened next is a long list of events that I will never forget as long as I live. It was during the day. I was sitting in bed after school pretending to do homework as I watched cartoons on the TV. I remember I was watching Cyber Chase. At this time, I had a small flat screen. How my room was set up, my bed was under my large window, and my TV was across from my bed, facing my window. Suddenly, my TV started flickering weird broken visuals, and then shut off completely, and as I was going to stand up to investigate what had happened, I noticed a reflection in the now blank screen. It was a shape behind me in the window. My home is a 1-story, so I immediately froze, fearing someone was watching me in my backyard. The figure wasn't very tall. It only stood at about half of my window. I couldn't make out any features. My thin curtain was hiding them away from me, but I knew from where they were standing that they could see me very clearly. I was mid-standing, so my body was at a weird angle as I stood frozen, staring at the shape in my window, unmoving. I don't know how long I stood there, but it was enough time to make my legs start to ache. Finally, the figure turned to their side and walked away. I felt like I'd lost all the blood in my face. I still stood there for a few more minutes before getting the courage to crawl on my bed and look out the window. Thankfully, I didn't see anything back there, but ever since that day, I got paranoid, obsessing over wondering if I'll see the shape in my window again. Then, that fear seeped into my dreams. It wasn't every night, but at least once a month, I would have a dream about lying in my bed at night, and when I looked out my window, I would see a shadowy shape in my window. The first time I had that dream, I froze. I couldn't move or do anything out of fear, but eventually, when I had that dream, I would get up on my knees on the bed, and the shape outside would follow me so that it was facing me at eye level from through my thin curtain. Then, I got brave enough to quickly open the curtain, but nothing would be there. Suddenly, it would be daytime in my dream, and everything was okay. Then I would wake up the next morning exhausted. Then, things started happening when I was awake again. When I was about 13, the tapping started. 3 slow and steady taps at my window, and then 3 more taps. I tried to shrug it off as some branch tapping on my window in the wind. A few days after it started, when I was jumping on my trampoline in the backyard, I stared at my window. I was wondering if what I experienced so far was real, or if I was just crazy. Then, I realized that there was no bush or trees near my window. There was absolutely nothing that could have been tapping on my window. I felt fear take me over, feeling like I was suddenly being watched. I hopped off my trampoline and I ran inside. That night, the tapping came back. This time, rather than nails tapping on the window, it sounded like someone's knuckle rapping on the glass. At this point, I had kind of gotten used to it. Whether the being on the other side of the window was real or imaginary. This time, like in my dream, I got up on my knees on my bed, facing the window. Unsure if the being outside had moved with me to be eye level from outside like in my dream. I slowly pulled the curtain to the side. I gazed out into the black void of the night. The nightlight that I had illuminating me in my room prevented me from seeing anything beyond the window. I have no idea if there was someone staring back at me, and my heart started pounding. But I didn't want to show that I was afraid, so I stayed there, staring. The tapping had stopped as I stared out the window, and eventually I decided I had stared enough and closed my curtain back and then laid down in bed, somehow finding the will to fall asleep. The tapping would continue for years, but I had learned to just ignore it since that night. Then, something new started. One night during the tapping, I swear that I heard the click of a camera. I tried to shrug it off, but nearly every day I would start to hear the camera go off just beyond the wall. It started to scare me. Had the being started to take pictures? Was there even anything there? And then, I saw a flash as I was looking out the window. The fear apparent on my face, and then at the same time I heard the click of that camera. I tried to act calm as I got out of bed, walking out of the room and closing the door. It was early enough that my mom was still awake, and she didn't question when I came into her room wanting to hang out. I still hadn't ever spoken about this to anyone. After that, it was another couple of years before anything else happened. But I started noticing a buzzing sound. It started happening at the same time every day. Around 3 p.m., it was a loud buzzing. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from for the life of me. My uncle was living with us at this time, and he liked to take his phone calls out in the backyard for privacy reasons. One day, he busts into the house after taking a call outside and told me and my mom that he saw a drone hovering outside my window. My heart dropped, and that proved that something was real, tangible. Someone else had seen something. And that made the past year's memories feel validated. The visitor had upped their game. My mom did nothing about it, and neither did I. What could we do? The police wouldn't do anything because no crime had technically been committed that could be proven. So I just continued to hear the buzzing outside of my window. One day it stopped, though, and again, for a while, I was without another peep. But of course, this thing doesn't want to give up. I finally decided to get a desk, needing one for college work, so I got a tall one that had a lot of storage. I had moved my bed out from under my window, and now placing it against an adjoining wall, and placing my desk in front of the window. One day, I came home to everything in its place except for two things. I searched for my favorite shirt for a while, but I couldn't find it. Figuring it was just somehow somewhere that I couldn't find, I went to grab socks out of my sock bucket, which was just a plastic bin of socks haphazardly thrown in. But what I found wasn't just crumpled socks. On top of my socks was a single sock neatly placed over mine. It was a black sock with gray toes and heel, and all of my socks were short and only black. I grabbed it. I asked my mom and grandma if it was theirs, but I knew they both only wore white socks. It was scary imagining that someone came into my room to not only steal my clothing, but then leave something behind. Like a creepy gift. I decided to just throw it away. The way my desk is sat, a sliver of the window peeks out at the right side, directly looking over my bed. My window opens right to left, and sadly has no lock on it. So, as I laid in bed, I would stare at that sliver, just waiting for something to happen. But it never did. At least not when I was looking. One day, after I'd calmed down and stopped staring at my window, I looked over and noticed that my curtain was open. For some reason, I wasn't scared. It was during the day, so I could see that there was nothing there, but I knew that someone had opened my curtain from outside. The corner of my room was hard to get to. You'd have to climb over my bed to get to it. And I know it wasn't my mom or my grandma, and it definitely wasn't me. But I left it open for a couple of months, wondering if anything would happen, but never did. I could still feel eyes on me at night, and then one day I looked over, and my curtain was closed. And since then, nothing has happened. But I still wait for the tapping some nights. To this day, I have no idea who the figure was outside my window, or if they'll return. I'm not sure if this event involved aliens, or ghosts, or something else entirely, but I still remember this event quite vividly, and I'm not sure how to explain it. I'm a skeptic, but open-minded to consider possibilities outside the realms of science to explain this, since I can't think of any scientific explanation myself. This event happened roughly 8 years ago. I was approximately 7 or 8 at the time. My parents had been fighting and my dad was kicked out of the house. I'd been sent to bed. I slept in my parents' room facing the window, which had a gap between the set of blinds. The blinds were white, and any insect or bug that climbed up the window outside would have its silhouette reflected on the blinds. There was a tapping coming from the window, and my dad appeared from the neck up through the gap in the blinds outside said window. I could see a small bit of the shirt he'd been wearing earlier, though. The problem with this is, the bedroom window was on the 2nd story. The only thing below it was plants from the garden. There were no footholds or trees or anything like that could have enabled my dad to climb up to that spot. He started talking to me, making gestures to go along with his words. I think speaking to a small child and doing actions to go along with your words so they understand better. He told me not to let my mom know he was there, and that he was going to sleep in the garage. Problem with this is, my dad wasn't speaking aloud. It was more like his voice was talking very clearly in my mind. I'm also mostly deaf, 35% hearing, so there's no way I would have heard him so clearly, especially not through a window with cars driving down the street. The last thing I remember of him speaking to me, it was him making an action of going to sleep and telling me to close my eyes. I closed my eyes only partially, leaving them open enough to witness my dad scuttle onto the rooftop with just his arms, like some strange animal. I vividly remember that his body ended at the torso, watching his silhouette behind the blinds as he moved. My dad certainly had legs, and certainly didn't move like whatever this thing was. I immediately rushed to the living room and told my mom that my dad had been outside my window and climbed onto the roof. She went outside with a flashlight to check and found no evidence of anybody there. No footprints, no disturbances of the dirt or plants in the garden, and no marks on the window, and nothing in the garage. My dad came back to the house the next morning and seemed utterly confused when I asked him why he was outside my window the night before. He showed me and my mom proof that he'd been at a hotel all night. I believe the proof was a calling card with the name and phone number of the hotel. I don't recall exactly, but it was definitely something to do with the hotel. I still insisted that there had been someone outside the window, so my mom and dad both went to check that morning and still found nothing, and told me to stop making up stories. I've thought about this a few times over the years, and I still can't find a plausible conclusion for what I encountered. The one thing I know for sure is that I was not asleep nor hallucinating. I've never experienced hallucinations or dreams like this in my life. It was far too real for me to have been sleeping. Anybody able to shed any light on how to explain this? We moved into my current house over 9 years ago. Right beside our yard is a very old convenience store, coal mining shop. I'm not sure how old it was, but it was built sometime in the 1950s. The building had burned down before we had even moved in. Now, I've had most of these experiences inside the house. I've seen several shadowy figures in my room. Specifically, the one I've seen the most is a child who looks around the age of 5. I've looked into the history of my house and found nothing. However, I've seen and felt multiple things. I felt something tap on my shoulder or pull on the bottom of my shirt when I'm home alone. Something has called out my name several times, but one thing that stands out and terrifies me the most is a big black figure with red eyes that I always find in the corner of my room between my bed and desk. And it's always staring at me. To this day, I've only had it say 2 things to me. The truth isn't what you think, and don't go into the woods alone. It still doesn't make any sense to me, and it's been about 3 months since that happened. That didn't stop me from going on the hiking trail that used to be a mining trail that leads to an abandoned mining area behind my house with my sister, who was 14. However, my sister went into the woods alone one day on the hiking trail, and she was gone longer than usual, so I started texting her a bit, worried. After a bit, I decided to go look for her, texting my dad telling him I was joining her on the hiking trail, and not to alarm him, thinking that she was just chilling out by her sitting spot. As I was walking down the trail past the small wooden bridge, I noticed at the other end of the road, beside the trail, was that same black figure that stood next to my bed. I then hear my sister yelling for me from behind. I turn to her and then turn back, but the figure was gone. She asked why I was out at the bridge, and I answered with, "I was looking for you. You weren't answering your phone, so I got worried." She looked at me and said, "I was going to head to my usual spot, but once I got across the bridge to the deer hunting trail, I saw some guy walking down it. I couldn't recognize him, though." I looked at her in shock and explained what I had just seen. We both decided to head back home for the day, still spooked. It's been a while since that encounter, but I have no doubt that what we saw that day was not normal. This experience happened to my aunt and mom before I was even thought of. My mom and dad were just starting to date at the time, and I'll tell it as it was told to me many times over the years. My mom and my aunt, you'll see her in a lot of my stories as H, did everything together. They even worked together. On their days off, they would just get in my mom's car and ride around. And we still do this, by the way. It's one of my favorite things. One particular day, they got several calls on the CB radio, and this was back in the 60s, from friends or family they would pass asking them who all they're riding around with. Everyone knew that they never took others on their rides. Of course, it was just the two of them. They didn't understand why people were getting upset and asking why they would lie about something so insignificant as who was in the car. My dad even called on the CB and got really upset because they didn't ask him to go for their ride. It was a sister thing, and yet they seemed to have some other dude with them. He assumed it was H's boyfriend or something. So my great aunt ended up behind them, really small town in the south, and asked, "Can y'all pull over and come back to my car and help me with something?" Kind of confused but willing to help, they said, "Of course," and they did so. When they got back to my great aunt's car, she said, "Is something going on? Why don't you want anyone to know that you have someone in your car?" Thinking maybe they were being forced or some such, right? My mom was getting upset at this point and said, "For crying out loud, there's no one in the damned car, look," and turned and pointed, only to see some guy in their back seat. She swore that he wasn't in there before, and that he must have sneaked in when they were getting gas or something, but they didn't see him at all. They figured he must have been down in the floor or something and hiding. So they radio over to get some guys to come and check it out. This whole time, the guy didn't even fidget. Some big, buff guys, friends and family, came over and figured they would give this guy a what for sneaking into the car, and went up to pull the dude out. When they got to the car, he wasn't there. They came back to ask where he went, but looking back at the car, he was still right there. One of the guys actually got into the back seat of the car, where you could plainly see this dude and nobody was in the car. From outside the car, you could still see both of them in the back seat. But on the inside, it was only him. Now, growing up and hearing this, I started to think that this has to have grown into the retelling, right? That's purely impossible. So, at different times, I contacted each person that I could who were involved in this, and they each told me the exact story from their point of view. I can't explain it any more than they could. This only ever happened in their cars. It happened in my aunt's car too, and only if it was only one or both of them in the car. This was the first time it happened, but it had happened several times after. The dude could never be seen inside the car, only from the outside. There's another story to this too. I'll add it if anyone is interested. This one's already too long. Edited to add. I just talked to my aunt and she said that occasionally they could see the guy in their rearview mirror, but not every time. Not even a lot of the time. Usually they couldn't see him at all inside the car, and she said that he wasn't anyone that they recognized. This story happened about a year later. The person in the back seat was still seen quite frequently in my mom's and aunt's cars, and they became used to it. As I said, occasionally they could see him in their rearview mirror, but usually he could only be seen from outside the cars. On this occasion, Mom and H were taking a bit longer ride and were, as was usual, listening to their radio pretty loudly and singing along. Their ride had taken them past their paternal grandmother's gravesite. Now, you all need a little bit of background here. Grandmother S, my great-grandmother, was a bad mamma jamma. Everyone said she was a witch. And this being the South, anyone even remotely different was called a witch, so pay that no mind. However, this woman was into devil worship. She wasn't a Satanist, there's a huge difference. No, she was into animal sacrifice, blood rituals, all things ugly. And trust me, she was not a good person. She detested my granny, the lady who married and had children with her son, because Granny wouldn't take any of her crap, and other things that I also won't go into. So, on her deathbed, and this was witnessed by several people, including a doctor, she swore that she would come back through one of Granny's children or grandchildren, and that she would never allow any of my Granny's progeny to live in peace. Although I'll mention that my papa, her son, it wasn't like her, but his sisters and father were. Is this clear as mud? Anyway, okay, on with the story. On this bright, beautiful day, the road that Mom and H were on was really twisty, and it was a windy, hilly back road. They knew the roads pretty well. They traveled them quite often, and didn't think anything unusual would happen today. They would be wrong. Laughing and singing, all was hunky-dory until they passed the graveyard. They've always gotten chills passing here, but nothing really ever happened to them before. This day, just as they were going past, they actually felt like something got in the car with them, suddenly. They got cold on a summer day. The radio suddenly cut out, and they said they smelled what they assumed was roadkill, rotting meat, basically. Then, something weighed them down and held them against the seats. Neither one could move at all. They even had trouble taking a deep breath or saying anything, because the weight on their chest was so heavy. Then, Mom, she was driving, suddenly felt her foot getting heavier and heavier on the gas pedal. The car was going faster and faster down this winding, twisting road. She couldn't take her foot off the gas. She couldn't move even her other foot to the brake. She couldn't move her hands, and not even their heads. Only their eyes could move. The car was going so fast that it was starting to shudder and shake. However, they were kept on the road. They went around the curve safely, and they didn't have an accident. Mom was able to glance into the rearview mirror and saw that their passenger was with them again. Suddenly, after what felt like ages, the weight was lifted from them both, and they had control of both their body and the car. The cold and the smell was gone, and it was like nothing had ever happened. Of course, they were terribly shaken, and they had to pull over to get out of the car. They have no idea how they were able to come off that road safely, except to assume that their passenger helped them. Somehow. Now, obviously some of you guys are going to call BS, and that's okay. I was raised on this story, and I still find it hard to believe. However, I will say that I have heard this story from each of them more times than I can count. Neither of them have ever had the slightest change in this story, and to this day neither of them will even tell me where this road is. I know it isn't too far from where I grew up, obviously, but I can't even tell you for sure what county it's in. No one in the family will even speak her name, and even the ones who once knew where she was buried swear they cannot remember when asked. They shut down any questions immediately, and any and all records that they had were destroyed, and back then, nothing was kept outside the family. When I was about 4 or 5, we stayed with some of our family in an old house. Because it was so many people, I usually slept with either my mom or my sister. Mostly my mom. I always felt uneasy whenever I visited this house, especially at night. This one night, I was sleeping with my mom and I heard someone calling out my name. At first, I thought it was my sister or one of my cousins. I got out of the bed, left the room, and went into the hallway. It was always dimly lit at night, in case anyone needed to go to the bathroom. I looked down the hall to the rooms that my sister and cousins were in, but their doors were closed, and I didn't see any lights peeking out from underneath the door, so I knew that they hadn't called me. I heard the voice call my name again, and I immediately turned in the direction of the stairs at the other end of the hall. The voice kept calling my name and telling me they needed my help. I slowly walked down the hall and stopped at the top of the stairs. The hallway light illuminated most of the stairs, except for the bottom two. So I couldn't see anything beyond that point, just darkness. The voice called my name again, but the tone shifted slightly. It was a little more friendly and inviting. It said again that it needed my help. I asked it why it needed my help, but it said it would have to show me for me to understand. It begged me to come down the stairs so that it could show me. I took a step down the stairs, but a voice in my head said that it was a trick. So I yelled down to the voice that it was trying to trick me, and I was going to get my mom. The voice started begging me more to help it, and began to make crying sounds as if it were in pain. I immediately felt bad for it and started taking more steps down the stairs as the voice continued to plead for my help. I got halfway down the stairs when a voice screamed loudly in my ear, "Don't take another step. If you do, it'll take you and you won't be able to come back." I stopped, immediately frozen where I was. The voice at the bottom of the steps asked me why I had stopped. It told me to keep coming. I yelled no and told it that I knew it was trying to take me away. As I turned to run up the steps, the voice let out a growl of frustration. I was only able to go up one step before hands materialized coming up from the steps that I was on and grabbed my ankles and tried to pull me into the solid wooden stairs. I started screaming to be let go and beating the hands with my little fists, but it only pulled me harder. I felt as if it was starting to pull me into the stairs. I started screaming for my mom and begging it to not take me. All of a sudden, I felt hands around my waist and a force pulling me up and away from the hands. I looked up and I saw a being was with me. It materialized from a somewhat smoky state until it became as solid as me. It was levitating in the air as it reached down and had its arms around me, attempting to pull me up and away from the stairs. I clung to the being as if my life depended on it because I knew instinctively that it did. I'm not sure how long this tug of war went on. I just remember that the voice at the bottom of the stairs was growling and it was getting louder with frustration, and I was crying and begging the being not to let it take me. Eventually, the being was able to pull me free from the hands. It lifted me up, but I soon realized it was taking me too far up. Like it was going to take me through the ceiling. I freaked out and started squirming in its arms, begging it to take me to my mom. It started descending and then set me down in the upstairs hallway, outside the room that my mom was in. I bust through the door. I ran to the bed and started shaking my mom awake. I was hysterical. My mom woke up and asked me what was wrong. I tried to explain it to her, but I was crying so hard and shaking that she couldn't understand me. She told me it must have been a bad dream and tried to comfort me, and she held me until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I tried to tell my mom what happened, but she again dismissed it as a bad dream. Maybe it was. The funny thing is that other members of my family mentioned that morning that in the night, they either heard what sounded like yelling in the hallway, or they asked if there was a dog in the house because they thought they heard growling downstairs. These events happened in the winter of 1998. They're my first and only experience of this kind. We were driving, returning from a 1,000-kilometer, 600 miles, trip. Our plan was to stop halfway, have dinner, and find a place to stay. We left rather late, and it being winter, it was getting dark and cold. There wasn't much visibility as it was foggy. We decided to stop at this small town with no more than 1,000 inhabitants. The few motels were booked out, and we had to keep driving. However, just out of town was this mid-19th century 2-story Victorian-style house. It converted to a B&B, and it had a vacancy sign outside. We parked in the driveway and made some inquiries. We were greeted by a short man in his mid-40s, wearing reading glasses and what seemed like a wig. I imagined he would be the owner. "How can I help you? Please come in as it's getting cold. We have the fireplace on," he said. "We're after a room for the night and some dinner. Do you have any rooms available, and how much for a night?" "The house has 5 rooms, all vacant tonight, and each cost $200 a night, including breakfast." I looked at my girlfriend. Our budget was $40 for a motel room, and $200 was just way too much. Even though it was probably worth it, since the decoration and furniture were done to the period, and the house did have a romantic feeling. "Sorry, this is above our budget. We'll have to find somewhere else," I replied. "I understand. Just for you to consider, we do have a small 3-bedroom cottage next door. It used to be the caretaker's, and it's empty tonight. You can have it all to yourselves, and we can make it $90. We accepted his offer since driving any further could be dangerous. We were shown this weatherboard cottage, which had a small veranda at the front. Upon entering, there was a large corridor with the main bedroom on your left and the other bedrooms on the right. A small lounge room in the middle of the house, followed by a kitchen and a large bathroom at the back. The man lit the fireplace, showed around, and said goodnight. For dinner, we ate some leftover sandwiches and fruit that we had and went to bed. We couldn't find any blankets, which was odd given the temperature outside was below freezing. At night, I woke up and decided to go to the toilet. As I opened this door, I saw this 5-foot woman, early 50s, wearing an old-style long black dress, dark-haired, pulled up, staring right at me. I was weary, and I somehow knew that it was a ghost. I jumped, went back to the bedroom, closed the door, and woke up my girlfriend and told her that I saw a ghost. We both covered ourselves and our heads under the doona, and interestingly went back to sleep right away. Around 6:30 a.m., we woke up, had a shower, packed up our things, and went to the main house. The man greeted us. "Are you ready for breakfast? But before, if you're interested, I can give you a tour of the house." Since he was almost blocking the way to the dining room and his arms were showing the stairs, we ended up seeing the whole house. It was creepy. After breakfast, we paid and then left. "Geez, that man was strange. Didn't you find him strange?" I said to my girlfriend. "Which man are you talking about?" She replied. "The owner. Who else?" "I never saw any man, and the owner was a woman." She described the woman, and she had nothing to say about the man. It was better to forget this whole episode, we concluded, to never mention this to any of our friends, as they would just think we were crazy. And we then laughed it off. Around 2016, I remembered this story and did a Google search, and I found the B&B. To my surprise, in the About Us section, there was a picture of the original owners, a middle-aged couple, and the woman was the owner, wearing the same dress and with the same hairdo, exactly like I saw her. It gave me goosebumps. This took place a few years ago. I was 12 years old. My cousin, my aunt, my sibling, and I had flown to our home country for the summer holiday. We usually spent a few weeks there whenever we did that. I lived in my home country for a good portion of my childhood, so I still had some friends there that I saw when I visited. One of those friends was a girl, a year older than me. Her name was Josie. Josie, Angie, my older cousin by 1 year, and I had been out cycling like we did every day of our vacation. We were cycling down the usual back alleys of the suburban town that we lived in, and we were cycling down to the river to get some relief from the summer heat. Josie was first, she was leading us, and Angie and I were right behind her. Angie was the first one to spot him. The road we were taking was long and had a fenced-off field to its right. At the gate to that field stood a man. He was wearing a red t-shirt and dark pants. He was slouched, his hands outstretched in front of him, like he was begging the Lord to answer his prayers. As we got closer, we noticed that he had a shiny object in his right hand. There was blood running down both of his forearms. The man had slit his wrists with the blade that he was holding. We sped up and past him, stopping at the end of the road and then looking back at him. He was stumbling a little, probably from the blood loss. I watched him throw the knife onto the ground. I wasn't sure whether the blade made it to the other side of the metal fence or not. The three of us watched him walk in the opposite direction. We decided to continue on down towards the river. We passed in between the cornfields, left our bikes near the dirt road, and walked through the brush to get down to the mini beach by the river. We took our shoes off and stepped into the water, playing around as we did almost every day of the summer. An hour or two had passed, and we were on our way back from the river. We cycled our bikes from between the cornfields and onto the same road where we saw the man. The man was back at the gate. He was bent above the grass, swishing his bloody arms through the overgrown grass, as if searching for something, like the knife. We decided not to stick around to see what happened next. We didn't know if the man was in his right mind. He could have tried to have hurt us. Even though we were on bikes and he was stumbling on his own feet, we were just 3 little girls who were alone. We didn't take the risk. We didn't see the man again. My cousins, my aunt, my siblings, and I had flown back to our country of residence. On October 13th of 2016, at around 5:48 p.m., I received a message. Josie said she had seen the man again. She didn't give me any more details. She told me that she saw him around the same area, but nothing else. And neither one of us have seen or heard of the man since. So this was today's collection of scary Reddit stories. That is, scary stories from Reddit. The website. That place. Where I get most of my stories. Anyways, this is a grab bag of stories, and from here on out, these true scary story collections, TSCs, or ones that you've seen that just say true scary stories on them on the thumbnails, they're going to say the Reddit thing now. They're going to say creepy Reddit stories, scary Reddit stories, whatever I put on there. They will be stories from Reddit. It's just a grab bag. It's a full collection of random things I want to put together. Typically non-themed videos. Like, they're not stalker stories or just paranormal stories or just UFO encounters. They are just stories from Reddit. Yes. Huge thank you to everyone who listened to this point. If you did listen to this point, please know I do love you and I appreciate you. If you liked the video, consider hitting that thumbs up button. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new. or join down below. Whoops, I hit my mic. Or join down below, or go to Patreon, where for $1 a month you can get early access to my content. I love how I plugged my stuff after hitting my mic, because I'm very professional. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day. Once again, thank you. Please do leave me a comment down below if you have any suggestions for themes. Please keep them within the realm of, possibility. I am collecting lists. A lot of people have already sent ones in. I'm trying to find stories for them. Yeah. All that said, friends, I hope you have a great day. Hope I see you in the next video. But of course, until then, sleep well.